Peniche was a practical town where I could maintain the boat with shops and engineering works to support the fishing industry. I began looking again at wind vane steering methods. A UK sailing boat came in which had a type of wind vane I'd based mine on. My one had never steered the boat because it was stuck on the lower part, the pendulum servo oar, which was more complex and had a high requirement for both strength and very light responsiveness. Many different devices were used by the boats I'd seen, but I rarely saw self-built ones. However, it seemed the effort and time needed to design and construct a working version would be too high. It seemed better to spend the time working to earn the money to buy a new one rather than spending months fiddling with something which may not function. Long-distance sailors said, "Why don't you make one?" as if it was a simple decision and an easy process. Invariably they had €3,000 Monitor or Aries or one of the other proprietary models. If it was so easy, why did they cost so much? And why didn't more people make them themselves? Storm Petrel had a part-built wind vane on her stern, ready for development and refinement, or a replacement.
Men on the rifters, fishermen with lines, fishermen of Britain who live in a world all their own.
November the 8th. Blowing hot and cold about staying in one place or sailing southwards for the next 3 months. My instincts were telling me to snuggle down, take advantage of the shelter and friendly character offered by Peniche people and their harbour. A few days of strong winds and cloud made me content to accept the encroaching winter and just rest a while. Then a beautifully sunny and warm day would make me wish I was sailing southwards and experiencing the changing scenery of travel. I knew the winter would be much cooler and with strong winds, but I was unsure about the actual climate of Peniche. I was 12 degrees south of Bristol in the UK, and I hoped for a significant improvement in climate, but accepted it would get fairly chilly by January.
Almost anywhere's on this coast, from the Wash, right round to Southwold, down in Suffolk. You only got to look sideways, and round the corner there's a stretch of beach, and that old wind alone, clean.
I read an account by an American sailor who voyaged around the world. His writing consisted of fairly short paragraphs, and I made a note to myself to try and be more direct. I'd sailed and written previously in the Bristol Channel for 6 weeks in 1999, when I found a pleasing wandering narrative style to suit the Welsh and Devonshire coastlines. Then too I'd been alone and I found the same style again. Anne of Piece 4 enthused about microeconomics. Her idea was to save the seemingly insignificant amounts of money we all spend frivolously every day. Coffee in a cafe, postcards home, a chocolate bar here and a packet of crisps there. All those add up over a month to more than insignificant amounts of cash. The UK population spends a huge amount of money on chocolate bars, more than any other European country. Anne would save those small amounts and then help people she wanted to. Before I left the UK in Storm Petrel, Anne had pressed a £10 note into my hand saying, "If or when you get to Spain, buy yourself a bottle of whiskey as a celebration." Often while walking with Anne through the streets of Spain, I would suggest sitting on a sunny terrace to drink a tasty coffee, but she would resist, saying, "How about we have a nice cup of tea aboard the boat?" She would add temptation, and we can study that book about sailing in the Caribbean. Anne had a knack of nurturing and nudging people's dreams into reality. Tourists spend at every step of the holiday. A coffee, all-round ice creams for everyone, entrance fees to entertainment, gifts for those back home, suntan lotion, and on and on. A large number of people sailing long-term on well-maintained yachts would be unable to afford the cost of a conventional holiday, even though they spend whole summers living in places holidaymakers dream of. November the 9th. My argument against Anne's economics was the value I personally got from sitting in cafes. The coffee was a contract which allowed me to spend time writing. I wrote easily and with pleasure in cafes because there were people around to stimulate thoughts and ideas. My muse heads for the busy morning cafe or the laid-back afternoon terrace, and I go with her. I strongly wished to sail further south and catch up with Anne and Nev on Piece 4, but I seemed to have decided to stop for the winter. It was still possible to sail towards the Canary Islands, where I would gain winter sunshine far beyond the weakening rays of Portugal. If I only had a self-steering wind vane, then I would be able to go plus ultra, more further, and head towards the African shore and the Islas Canarias. It was cold in the UK by now. A friend emailed from Bristol telling me she spent bonfire night in some park, shivering in damp mist and with chilled hands. On the same night, I was strolling around Peniche in a thin jumper, not at all cold. I remained typically British, always talking about the weather. November the 10th. Friends asked for photographs of me looking sun-kissed and ravishingly slim after all the exercise of sailing and the days spent at sea in hot weather. I had an image of myself with long golden blonde sun-kissed hair and skin the colour of almonds, a blonde girl from Ipanema. In reality, I was only a little more tanned and sun-kissed than usual. The photographs I sent depicted my usual partly stressed, partly uneasy self. Two towels hung over the railings on the quay. Two German travellers broke pieces of bread to eat as they sat on the decking outside the marina office, showers and laundry. They were waiting for the agent of the Islas Berlengas to sell them a boat ticket. They were camping and travelled on trains with rucksacks and the dusty, casual look of contentment travellers can have. In the cafe where I sat, a television showed a chat show host previewing her show. She had big hair and often contracted the muscles around her eyes in an effort to appear warmly attractive. Instead, she looked manic, as if she would bite off your head in a nightmare, leaving red lipstick around the severed neck. Television weather forecast said it was a lot warmer here, even than in the north of Portugal. The temperatures increased from north to south. In the north, 17 degrees centigrade was usual for November. In the central area, including Peniche, there was 19 degrees centigrade. And in the Algarve, it was often 24 degrees centigrade. I talked each day in the Capitaneria, using the weather bulletin as a language lesson. It was really pleasant to have conversations which I missed in general. 18 centigrade was most agreeable. It did not drive me into the shade, yet it was easy to be warm with a light sweater. I was told the climate would not fall much lower than this, apart from the chill of a strong wind and rain occasionally. March and April would be really warm again. Each day I talked with the marina man about the meteorological predictions for the next 3 days, and we both acted as if I was waiting for a weather window to sail southwards, but we both knew I was quite happy to remain in Peniche for the time being. I learned the Portuguese for fog, high cloud, strengthening wind, morning mist, early frost, storm depression, and the whole range of variations. Early frost had me worried, but I was reassured it would be brief. It would soon burn off as the sun came up. I was being superficial in my weather obsession, as if I had nothing better to worry about than whether it was going to be sunny, like some hyper-tourist refusing to go home, wandering the holiday resorts in search of a bit of sun. I went again to the museum. Within the fortified walls there were little corners where the sunshine was unsullied by November breezes. As I came upon one such space, a little lizard sped across the stone floor like a tiny clockwork toy, its tail flailing as it ran between some sculptures. I stood stock still, aware that the shadow of my head was laying quite close to where the reptile had hidden. But there it was again, eager to soak up the sun in the short days of late autumn. The lizard came out again in little spasms of movement to rest in the sunshine, its black tongue minutely smelling the ground. I left it to its sun patch and went to see the cells of political prisoners under the dictator Salazar. There would have been little sunbathing lizards in those days too, when fascist guards patrolled the stone flagons of the fortification. On 25th of April 1974, the lizards would have hidden in their rock crevices, alarmed by the mass gathering outside of celebritants at the end of that dictatorship. Drawings made by a prisoner of the time were penciled figures and faces, finely drawn with singular strokes, clear curves, and perfectly round circles. Each line was a boldly executed trace, which suggested a highly artistic temperament with a carefully expressive hand. Sketches are often smeared images with indefinite form, true to the experience of being an observer. Reality blurs and pulses in front of us in an indefinable flux, and artists often portray this uncertainty of the visual field by applying several lines for a single side, or shading and blurring to give uncertain depths. However, this prisoner had drawn beautifully with bold, curvaceous commentary and innocence of thinking outside the political regime which had imprisoned him. Cafes are less about coffee than rest. Reading a newspaper or watching people go by, come in or leave, was endlessly banal and wonderful. Occasionally a cafe failed to be either banal or wonderful. A free internet facility financed by the Portuguese government was closed for a 2-hour lunch. The day was very warm. I'd walked for an hour, making a detour to an outlying shop to buy credit for my mobile phone. And I was looking forward to sitting in a cafe for a bit of dream time. The bolos looked bland. I ordered something which looked filling at least, and a teeny-weeny cup of coffee. I chose a seat with a view onto the town square, which had giant pineapple-like trees, zebra crossings everywhere, and a busy, soothing liveliness. The bolo was as bland as it looked. Half of a yellow cream filling ended up on my fingers, and the sugar coating scattered across the table and my lap. There was no plastic tissue box as there usually was in a self-respecting pasteleria. I reached for one on another table, glad to be finished with the messy, unexciting bolo, but I needed a sink with water and a mirror to remove the yellow slurp from my chin and fingers. I did my best to clean up and swept the sugar off the table onto the empty plate. Looking forward to the intense espresso coffee taste, I was disappointed with a bitter cup lacking pleasure. The waitress was young, pretty, and employed only for those traits. She wiped my table, but this was most unusual, not to be left to relax amongst the spoils of consumption at my leisure. My coffee cup was removed, and I felt stripped of the one minor pleasure left, so I indicated that I had not yet finished my coffee, and the waitress looked at me as if I was dumb, for the coffee cup was all but empty. I just wanted to savour the final sugary grounds at the bottom of the cup. Where the harbour mole joined the fortification of the castle, dozens of cats lived in small holes in the high walls. They were fed with bowls of food left in a nook nearby where the road ran past the base of the castle wall. Old men sat in a line. They looked like retired fishermen, chatting and watching over the harbour activity, leaning on walking sticks or standing with flat caps and muted, worn clothes on. One of these men approached with a plastic carrier bag. As he hollered, the cats reacted immediately, peering around rocks, waking from slumbers higher up on the part cliff, part wall of the castle, and running down to his feet. The man walked to the sea wall, now followed by 4 black, 4 tabby, 2 ginger and 2 pale-coloured cats. They ran around, tails in the air, and rubbed against his legs as he reached the feeding spot. More and more cats came out of the fortification wall and ran across to the man as he emptied the bag. On the wall above the line of men was a collection of household objects. Several telephones were placed into notches in the rock, and a television set had been set on a ledge, as if it was in a cafe. Painted letters declared, "The Social Club of Peniche." As the man fed the cats, I thought how sad it would be if health and safety rules prevented the scene. In the UK, 20 or so feral cats would be removed for their own and the public's good. The man's voice as he hollered to the cats was unrestrained and carried the joy of bringing 20 cats running to his feet. A cream-coloured cat walked over to the castle wall and disappeared into a small opening. It was sheltered from the westerly storms by the massive walls. The cats doubtless suffered a lack of veterinary attention, even if those which came running looked bright-eyed and healthy. On a walk in another region, while visiting Cascades, a cat living in the sea wall next to a cliff-top restaurant had kittens which looked very unhealthy. They had running eyes and one was almost blind with infection. The difference between the two populations of cats was the attention and protection offered by the retired men who treated the cats as pets, whereas the sick kittens were in a place which was busy with tourists in the summer but almost deserted in the winter. A cliff-top road several kilometres out of Cascades. Peniche was very busy with fishing boats at all times of the day and night. When a large boat arrived, a siren, like a wartime bomb alert, whined and brought workers to the fishing quays. Orange flashing lights on forklift trucks sped about, and the sound of diesel freezer compressors echoed over the water. A boat pushed hard between the red and green lights of the harbour entrance and continued at full speed across to the waiting buyers and handlers for an instant auction of fresh fish. At night, I stirred in my sleep at the sound of a boat arriving, and within 2 or 3 minutes a wake reached Storm Petrel and tossed her up and down against the fenders. My fenders were tested to their limits by these unrestrained fishing boat washes. When one split open, I bought a bigger replacement. I didn't mind lurching and bouncing against the pontoon as long as no damage was done to the boat. I hardly noticed it sometimes when I was absorbed in a burgeoning new design for a wind vane steering system. I'd been spending time with the muse of self-steering system designs, and I had a new version to work on. It was extremely simple compared to the over-complexity of previous approaches. The new version would result in an emergency rudder as a plus. One night was distinctly chilly. The weather forecast spoke of frost inland on higher ground. I missed the hot sunshine and the friends I made when we were all making way southwards from northern Spain. In the ports along the way we would always meet again, which was quite funny sometimes. Alone and exploring a forgotten alleyway leading to some enchanted town square with cicadas buzzing and caged canaries singing, there would appear so-and-so from Sweden, or what's their names, from Canada, and they would be just as surprised to see me. Greetings, information about the recent sailing trip to get there. We'll pop over later. And then alone again to wander back into the enchantment of solitary exploring with a route carefully set away from the other cruisers. For they too had to discover for themselves the lovely view of the sea if you walk up to the saintly statue, or the old stone public washing house found by walking just up the hill from the supermarket. But those experiences would be ruined if someone else insisted you go there. Telling cruising people about all the best spots and experiences around a new harbour would force them to sail somewhere else and discover things for themselves, in peace. In Bayona, a couple with 2 children would appear at the window of almost every cafe I found to hide in. The children would call, "Hello, Clarissa!" through the sunny doorway, a joy to encounter every time, although we all looked forward to a time when we had all become truly lost in our travels. The family sailed to Madeira on their way to Australia. They were self-educating the children, who gave me drawings of Storm Petrel and a fishing boat and a paper chain of little Storm Petrels flying across the sea. Meeting again after travelling several days was always pleasant, and at sea there was plenty of time for solitude. Page 85. A storm was coming. Winds of 60 miles per hour were forecast for starters. I moved Storm Petrel to a more protected berth inside the pontoons, having been warned Penny suffers from strong surge in southwesterlies. Worse would be a violent storm from the south, and that was forecast. I purchased a new fender to replace one which had split. The new one was bigger than any in my set of 8 fenders. Usually I picked up flotsam fenders after storms, and as long as the boat which lost it was not obvious, I added it to my collection. Such as a fender found in Boulogne, France, a few years ago, and named Big Bertha because it was huge, but Big Bertha was sold with the previous boat, Juggler. Storm Petrel was twice as heavy as Juggler, and I needed to add several more large fenders. In 12 years of cruising, I'd never purchased a fender. Now I was a long-distance deep-water sailor. Gulp. It was impossible to tow a dinghy behind, and I kept an inflatable dinghy deflated and rolled up on deck at the risk of not being able to use it in an emergency. This was one of the ongoing dilemmas, and I strongly wished to have a dinghy to get into at short notice. 20 minutes was far too long to be confident of saving myself in the event of a sinking. This was what winter was good for, a time to sit back and reflect on the way I'd been doing sailing. I read the accounts of some cruisers whose attitude towards cruising was very down to earth, such as when a gale prevented progress one day. It was described as, "We had a force 8 blowing against us for 9 hours, which slowed us down." If I met with such heavy weather, I would fill several pages with descriptions of the waves and the struggle to keep going. When these cruisers encountered really adverse conditions, they simply closed the doors, sat inside, playing cards, until it blew itself out. The wisdom is rugged. All storms have an end.